each year we come here, getting ready for the next year, reflecting on the economic health of our federation. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the positive impact this budget will have on all of our communities, Mr. Speaker. And we look forward to a bright future for our federation with well-earned optimism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is an opportunity for us to consider where we've been, what we have achieved, the obstacles, because they were great, you know, when we came in here, the obstacles we had to overcome, and the threats that lay before us. And Mr. Speaker, we look forward to what we will continue to achieve going forward as we build a safer and a stronger St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, this Team Unity administration had guided us through a period of economic success, the likes we have not seen for some time. Mr. Speaker, we must be reminded that when this Team Unity administration took office, we had a sky-high IMF debt that was left behind by the previous administration. And I hear them now trying to change the storyline on how that debt came into being. All of a sudden, Mr. Speaker, we cannot forget that our streets were unsafe, that our beautiful federation had become one of the most dangerous places in the world. Mr. Speaker, this Team Unity administration said no more and put in place measures to get our country, our federation, headed in the right direction. And today, Mr. Speaker, we are delivering more new jobs, building bigger and better houses, Mr. Speaker, and keeping our streets safe, Mr. Speaker.
Fundamental for
Mr. Speaker, all of us seated in this chamber today would have to admit that none of this would have been possible had it not been for our strong economic management, Mr. Speaker. One that we, the Team Unity administration, is proud of, extremely proud of, Mr. Speaker. Economic growth increases every year of this administration. IMF debt left behind by those opposite paid off, Mr. Speaker. Record numbers of tourists visiting. We heard the minister speak about it last year, and it's saying just the cruise ships, the 4 that can now berth at Port Zante at the same time, but it's also airlift, Mr. Speaker. He told us about all these new airlift coming in. You said Wednesdays would become a norm. A norm, Mr. Speaker. Something good must be happening, Mr. Speaker. The Poverty Alleviation Program is supporting more than 4,000 homes, Mr. Speaker. 4,000 homes of people who are most vulnerable in our communities, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we can't forget where the CBI program was, Mr. Speaker. We can't forget the turmoil of the last 5 years of the previous administration, Mr. Speaker. Our visa access, visa-free access to Canada, gone. Why? Because unscrupulous actors were walking around with our passports, Mr. Speaker. It is this Team Unity administration that is now bringing back the respect of our CBI program, Mr. Speaker. And that 17% VAT that have been thrown around, it ain't our VAT, no. It ain't our 17% VAT, Mr. Speaker. It was, we have to be reminded, brought on to us because our country was bankrupt under the previous administration, who had to run to the IMF to be bailed out of that, Mr. Speaker. And it is this administration, dear Mr. Speaker, who removed VAT on food, removed it on education, removed it on funeral expenses, Mr. Speaker. And I could go on and on about all of the great things that this Team Unity administration have been doing for the people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am confident, and I can say this, that this Team Unity administration will never become complacent or comfortable, Mr. Speaker. We understand that to truly deliver in ways that would meaningfully impact the lives of the people within our communities, we must continue to implement policies that improve their lives, Mr. Speaker. Policies that actually touches the people in a real way, Mr. Speaker. And that is what this budget does. It continues our long-term plan to build a stronger and safer future. Mr. Speaker, it can be easy for us on occasions like these. We're discussing the budget, so we're talking about the economy and the debt and figures and statistics, but we forget the human stories behind those numbers, Mr. Speaker. The progress we have made impacts people's lives for the better. More job, more opportunities, more young people are now likely to enter employment rather than moving towards crime, Mr. Speaker. This means crime's down as young people see better prospects for their future, Mr. Speaker. We have safer streets and communities, and that fear that we lived in once has now been reduced, Mr. Speaker. I've had persons come to me and said, I was afraid to have my children walk the alleys of McKnight too late in the night or in the village community. But now they are at ease. My children can run and play. Mr. Speaker, consistent economic growth allows us to build bigger and better homes. Bigger for real. I hear him talking about the townhouses even have a third room downstairs, Mr. Speaker. More housing means more people fulfilling their dream of having their own home, Mr. Speaker. And when we see more jobs, whether it be in tourism, construction, agriculture, because the minister spoke about the opportunities in agriculture, and in ICTs, which I will touch on a little bit more in my presentation, further on in my presentation. The result is that more people can provide for their families. So we can't forget the human elements, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the scourge of unemployment is lifting, and people can go to work with pride, knowing that they can financially be independent. They can support themselves. They don't have to look for handouts, Mr. Speaker. And of course, sound economic stewardship means we have the funds to support essential services. Better equipped school to educate our young people. Better paid nurses to care for us when we are sick. And we heard the minister with responsibility speak about the fact that increases are in 2020 for our nurses. All of this possible because of sound economic management. I can't say that enough, Mr. Speaker, because it's just the facts. Sound economic management. Mr. Speaker, if we allow our country to go back to the past, to the previous administration, what will they bring with them, Mr. Speaker? Nothing more than their high debt policies, Mr. Speaker, just like the last time. And there will be no money to provide for services or increase salaries, Mr. Speaker.
Has happened before.
Mr. Speaker, we heard them speak about all types of fancy things, how they intend to cut taxes, but at the same time, giving away everything in the country for free. But as usual, no indication of how this country is supposed to pay for all of these giveaways. Because if you're going to be giving away money, the money must come from somewhere, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, on the one hand, you're decreasing the revenues of the country. On the other hand, you're increasing our expenditure. So if there's more expenditure than there is revenue, what that mean for us, Mr. Speaker? What would that mean for us, Mr. Speaker? What it sounds like to me, Mr. Speaker, is that the intention is to take the country back to the IMF, Mr. Speaker. And with all these duty-free taxes that they're talking about, reduced tax here and all these things, to me, it sounds like instead of 117 million, it's going to be about 234 million, Mr. Speaker. Now let's consider, Mr. Speaker, the haircuts that this country had to take when they took us to the IMF the last time. Even our churches felt the sting, Mr. Speaker. The sting of bankruptcy, Mr. Speaker. Our people were suffering. Increases for civil servants were frozen because we couldn't afford to do it. Our families were struggling to provide the basic needs. 17% taxes on food, 17% taxes on medication, Mr. Speaker. Now imagine, Mr. Speaker, what would happen if instead of 117, we have to go to them for 234, Mr. Speaker, 234 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the previous administration, they're into verse in finance. And as a result, they're incapable of ensuring that the fiscally responsible programs that have allowed our economy to thrive in the last 4 years and which allowed us to experience surplus after surplus after surplus, that allows our nurses now to be able to say that in 2020 we are getting those increases, will be all lost under their watch, Mr. Speaker. They will return our country back to being bankrupt, back to being indebted into the IMF, and who knows who else we would be owing at that point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the previous administration are talking about vision. What vision, Mr. Speaker? All I hear when I hear them talk is Visa cards and debt. Because that's all it is, Mr. Speaker. Just running up more debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our country does not deserve that. Our country cannot go back to that, Mr. Speaker. To put it in simple terms, all the achievements I have mentioned to them, Mr. Speaker, and all that you have heard from our side would be lost, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, that will never happen. Our country and our countrymen know we are in good hands with Team Unity. And so, I can't even be too concerned about mismanagement, because I know for certain the people of this country know we can't go back to bankruptcy. And so they will continue to support the Team Unity administration for a better future. But, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, my interests, ICTs. And so I want to speak a little bit more about the digital economy that this Team Unity administration is putting forward. Mr. Speaker, I am so pleased that my fellow colleagues in this Team Unity administration fully understands the need to transition to a digital economy and the role that this would play in a future St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Speaker. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that curriculum is being developed for primary school students to be able to code, Mr. Speaker. At some point they'll be able to write applications that would benefit us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, even, Mr. Speaker, making life more efficient for us, Mr. Speaker. Technological innovation is not something that we need to be suspicious of, Mr. Speaker. Instead, I would address the laptops that I won't even show if I should. Because they're talking about these laptops that they provided with a Linux platform that the students couldn't use, that they had to go find somebody who could hack into the machines in order for them to be able to use them, Mr. Speaker. And then so then they keep talking about this, and all it was just smoke and mirrors. Laptops they couldn't even use, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yes, the digital economy will help modernize how we do business and provide services. But crucially, it also provides opportunities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker?
Order. It's clear to me that the presenter is being disturbed or being interrupted, being distracted.
Mr. Speaker, the opportunities that will be created for our young people with ICT is something that we must embrace, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would also allow us to improve education, healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Again, we heard the Minister of State speak about the health management system, Mr. Speaker. Imagine all of our health records, instead of being in paper form, are now digital, Mr. Speaker. So imagine going to A&E. Just imagine with me for a minute going to the A&E. And instead of having to go in, take your pressure, take all the same information, then someone has to leave from the A&E to go over to records in order for someone to be able to look through the paperwork to find your records and then bring it back to A&E, which would be time consuming, and you would not be able to be treated as fast as you could. No. Someone can stay right in A&E, Mr. Speaker, pull up your information, and so you won't have to be answering the same questions every time you go to the hospital, Mr. Speaker. That's advancement, Mr. Speaker. That is advancement that actually touches people in a practical and real way, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, it would also be delivered through social services, Mr. Speaker. I know this will be something that people will be happy about, because even up to Monday night when I was in the community, a lady said to me, I know you told me about the social services to get help, and I went there, but it's just so much run up and down. I have to go there, get them some form from them to carry back to a doctor, for the doctor to fill it out, to collect from the doctor, to take back. But, Mr. Speaker, when we introduce a digital economy, it means that you don't have that run around. They come into the social services. The social service collect the information, and I think I heard the minister saying that all of the providers, even the private ones, will be connected into our health management system. So then that means social services can get their information electronically. Again, efficiency. Again, advancement that touches people in a real way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we also heard about the e-payment system that is coming on stream. No more standing in long lines at Inland Revenue, Mr. Speaker. We would be able to pay online, Mr. Speaker. Time cut in half, Mr. Speaker. Real advancement that touches people in a real way, Mr. Speaker. And the e-traffic system, Mr. Speaker. I could go and register my vehicle online. I don't need to go to the traffic department to get a paper to take down to IRD. All of this can be done electronically. You know, we hear people all the time frustrated with the time it takes just to do any type of business with government. Digital economy is coming for 2020. Real advancement, Mr. Speaker, that touches people in a real way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, progress in the digital economy does not only help provide opportunities, but it helps our economy become more efficient, Mr. Speaker. It would mean we can improve efficiency in business operations, expanding entrepreneurship, job creation, and wealth generation, Mr. Speaker. Real advancement that touches people in a real way, Mr. Speaker. All of these things would help St. Kitts and Nevis economy move into the future with confidence. And I look forward to being a part of that journey, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Team Unity wants people in our communities to look to the future with hope, Mr. Speaker. Hope that their dreams are a real possibility and not just a fantasy, Mr. Speaker. That if they work hard, they can achieve their goals, Mr. Speaker. Strong economic management is required for that to happen, Mr. Speaker. We just celebrated our 36th year of independence. At that point, we reflected on where we have come from and the advances that we make. And so now it's time for us to look forward to 36 more, Mr. Speaker. If this federation is going to continue advancing in the right direction, we must deliver those jobs and opportunities, especially for our young people. For if we do not, then our people's talents will go to waste, Mr. Speaker. Our progress would be stalled and frustrated, Mr. Speaker. This is why continuing to build our economic achievements is a key part of nation building, a key part of our story. St. Kitts and Nevis could become the shining light of good governance and prosperity in the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go back to the past. We cannot risk the hope of a brighter future. We heard of all the great progress we have been making in tourism. We just keep progressing in leaps and bounds, Mr. Speaker, record after record, facts that cannot be denied, Mr. Speaker. We can't afford to go back to bankruptcy, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what that past looks like is evident in my own constituency, Mr. Speaker. And you heard it listed before, Mr. May telling a lie. 20 years and so much things never done because the people were neglected, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the opposition have been feeling comfortable in constituency number 3. And so they didn't believe that they had to deliver for the people. Despite holding this seat, like they like to boast from the beginning, they simply have not delivered, Mr. Speaker. The record lack of infrastructure, and you heard them listed, Mr. Speaker. Neglect. It was listed from the member for number 3, reminding us of their neglect all these years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, neglect of our community centers. Mr. Speaker, land in the constituency. You walk the streets of the constituency and you realize lands gone to people from everywhere else. 6, even Nevis 11. And none for the people in constituency number 3. Mr. Speaker, that's what I call neglect, Mr. Speaker. A lack of proper playing fields for our young people to play in a safe environment. And so, Mr. Speaker, now when I walk through the constituency and I speak to the people of number 3, you know what they said to me? They say, a vote for the opposition? That's a wasted vote, Mr. Speaker. They want Mr. Speaker, they want constituency 3 to get its fair share and to be part of the Team Unity movement that is delivering for our federation. Our local community will no longer put up with that level of neglect, Mr. Speaker. So the opposition may feel comfortable in constituency number 3, but the people are not, Mr. Speaker. I am not, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the presentation from the member for number 3 proves how wasted his time has been, Mr. Speaker. After 5 years of laziness, his comfort. What have the people got to show for it, Mr. Speaker? When he spoke, he said nothing about what he has done to make our streets safer. Nothing about building bigger and better housing. Nothing about having created more jobs. Nothing about building more roads. Nothing about opportunities for young people, Mr. Speaker. He said nothing because he has done nothing. Instead, he stands up and attacks my family, Mr. Speaker.
On a point of order, it is clear to me that the senator opposite prepared her speech before I spoke. Because if she was responding to what I said, she would realize that I spoke about almost everything she has mentioned there. So it is clear that she is reading from her and she needs to withdraw that. I spoke about all of the roads, programs, help to the young people, everything that I have done as an opposition member. And she must also remember that I am not a part of the government. She is the one who has the ear of the government and could not move the government to do these things. That is why they want Labour in government.
Thank you, Mr.
Prepared
Speaker.
speech.
So, Mr. Speaker, no wonder the people in constituency number 3 say he's a wasted vote, Mr. Speaker. A member who has wasted the opportunity they have given him, Mr. Speaker. The people of constituency 3 deserves better, Mr. Speaker. And it is no wonder, Mr. Speaker, the people of number 3, they openly refer to this member as can't deliver con race. That's how they say it, can't deliver con race. This comes loudest, Mr. Speaker, and it's loudest from the Labour voters, you know. Can't deliver. He can't deliver on fairness, on equity, on better protection and opportunities for all workers. Can't deliver con race, Mr. Speaker. He can't deliver safer streets. Can't deliver better housing. Can't deliver more jobs. He can't deliver because he thinks he does not need to, Mr. Speaker. He is taking the people for granted. Constituency 3 deserves much better. Much better.
Order.
Honorable
members, order. People say they can't see a car. Byron from down Byron to come here, listen.
And Mr. Speaker, the people of number 3 says we deserve action, not excuses, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker doesn't deliver. Mr. Speaker doesn't deliver, but he's bragging in here that he already won.
Who said that?
He doesn't care about the people, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker,
this is obviously a prepared speech. I never said that. I never used those words. No, man. She said I said. I mean, maybe, Mr. Speaker, maybe, Mr. Speaker, in the mind of the senator, hold on, I'm responding. Maybe in the mind of the presenter, she's hearing Congress has already won. But I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I never said that. I didn't even suggest that. That's a prepared speech.
and so, Mr. Speaker, that is why I had to be working for the people of number 3, Mr. Speaker. That is why I had to be working to get their infrastructure. And thank you very much. I walked you through the constituency so you could see what needs to be done. Walked you through the constituency and you have agreed and delivered. And that's why Garvey's is now being done. And Matinley is going to be done. But then, honorable member for number 1, and I must thank you, Shadwell Estate, a development that's been there from since I know myself. No getting infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the list can go on and on, Mr. Speaker. East West Farm Development, not infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. Doors, not infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. Boys View, not infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, everywhere you go, not infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. 20 years and no infrastructure, Mr. Speaker.
Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have to come in here to toot my own horn, Mr. Speaker, because the people know I'm delivering. And so while he's out there trying to say all the things that I did not do, somebody sent me something posted by the Trafalgar South Stars, and I'll read it, Mr. Speaker. The management and players of the Trafalgar South Stars would like to thank the representative of number 3, Mrs. Byron Nisbett, for her contribution to the team with our second kit. The club appreciates her dedication and the support of our team. We look forward to working for her more in the future, Mr. Speaker. While he's in here talking, Mr. Speaker, I don't have to respond. The people responding for me because they know the work that I do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and that is just how it goes, Mr. Speaker. No need to come in here to talk about anything. The people will talk for me, Mr. Speaker. No need for me to talk. The people will talk for me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and there's so much more to be done, Mr. Speaker. A lot more improvements that needs to happen in order for the community to thrive, Mr. Speaker.
I've never seen my son. You need to know of my ability. In case you don't like them, you need to know it. Then you doctor, I taught him.
I wish to point out that the member presenting paused when, to me, she was being interrupted by some of her own members. That's when she paused, so I gave time for members to settle down, but then others on the opposition bench joined some of her members, so then I now have to intervene. Let's have some order. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because I want to make sure everybody hears this. Mr. Speaker, for progress to be happy, for us to have see progress in these areas in our community, Mr. Speaker, we need to have a representative that is hungry to deliver, Mr. Speaker. One who is ready to serve, Mr. Speaker, and not one who is just comfortable, Mr. Speaker. Labour win all the time, so me ain't got to do nothing. But come in here shortly after and list out a laundry list of things I do in the last couple of months, Mr. Speaker.
One which is hungry, active.
And so, Mr. Speaker, I said I would be brief. I said I wouldn't be brief, and it seems as if I started a little thing here. I heard them say earlier that they want me to work with them. So clearly they know the type of work that I can do. And I know my good, honorable member for number 6 wish I was the candidate instead for him. Mr. Speaker, we as a federation are in a position where we can look to a future with hope. With this Team Unity administration, Mr. Speaker. Yes. Thanks to this Team Unity's management of our money, of our economy, we are on the right path, Mr. Speaker. And there is still more to do. And that's how we know that come the next general elections, the people of St. Kitts will say, take another 5 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that for all Kittitians and division, their hopes and dreams are best served by an economy that creates new jobs and opportunities. And I have confidence, Mr. Speaker, that this budget and Team Unity keeping St. Kitts and Nevis in the right direction is the best chance for us to continue to build a safer and stronger tomorrow. And the people will agree next time around, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I said I would be brief, and I was brief. I think I've said enough and leaved enough information for people to be able to think about. And so with those few words, Mr. Speaker, may it please you.